So to week 8 of Advanced Web Programming, today we're going to look at securing our bookstore using Passport and Passport Local. So I'm going to just take my lesson 6, copy it, paste, rename it to lesson 8. And you can start a new command prompt, just get your application launched and running in the browser. And you'll notice when you click on your register and login links, we basically just get a blank page. We get a header and a footer with a heading that says register or login, but we have no forms. We haven't built those pages yet. So to save you some time, rather than us hand coding those HTML forms, I've put the HTML for the register and the login EJS that you need on Blackboard. So if you go into your lesson 8 folder on Blackboard, here is all the code for register. So you can just highlight all of that, copy it, paste it into the register EJS that we built back in like week 3. And then here's all the code for your form for login. So you can take both of these, just copy the HTML, paste it into your versions. And then when you click on your register and login links, you should get 2 blank forms. So I'm going to copy everything from register. So I'll just get my application started, make sure it's running. So here's how we left it. We have our books page. Oops, that is the wrong file. So right now on register and login, we just built these as blank pages where we stuck the header on the top and footer on the bottom. So this is exactly how my application was back in week 6 at the end of class. So now I'll just copy this stuff and open up views and register. I'll delete everything that's there. And paste in all my HTML. So now register looks like this. And then I'll do the same with login. So we'll take it from a blank page and we'll just do the same on login. I actually think I'll change one little thing on here. Rather than a username, maybe we'll call this field, we'll give them a label that says email, and we'll add a type equals email so that we're forcing the user to give us an email address as a username rather than any text that they want to. So inside of register, maybe I'll just change that label, say email. And inside of my username input, I'll add that type as email. You're making a brand new one?
Well, no, I'm trying to run the code and saying I need Express.
Just do npm install, and it will read any dependencies listed in package.json that you're missing, and it'll download them. Right? That's what I do when I mark your stuff, because I don't want to have to download the node modules and you don't want to have to upload them to GitHub. Right? As long as you've listed them in package.json, you've installed them with -- save, I can download your repository without your node modules. Once I've downloaded it, all I do is run the command npm install, which then reads package.json. It reinstalls all the dependencies that you added, and then I can run it. So maybe here on the login screen. So this way, we're forcing people to sign up with an email address as their username. So these forms aren't going to do anything yet. We've written get handlers. There are no post handlers. So if you fill out either form and click submit, we're going to get a 404 error. Right? Our application is only designed to display the forms. It doesn't yet know what to do when a form has been submitted. Everybody with me so far? Does anybody have a question at this point? So just above those two forms I gave you, here are the packages we want to install. And we should use the -- save option. So I'm going to stop my server in the command prompt. Now you can install these with 4 separate commands, but as you saw in the video, that developer actually installed all of them with one npm install command, which is what I'm going to do. Well, I type the same thing over and over again. So I'll just stop my server for a minute. Clear my command prompt. So we're going to do an npm install. And I can just separate the package names with a space. Passport, passport-local, passport-local-mongoose, and express-session with -- save. You don't have to do this in one command. You could run 4 separate npm install commands. So Passport is the main middleware. Passport local, store the usernames and passwords in a local database. And local mongoose, because that local database could be anything. It doesn't have to be MongoDB. We could be using some other kind of database. So Passport local mongoose says, we're storing the account in our own database, and that's going to be a MongoDB database that we're using Mongoose to interface with. An express session is for storing those user identities in session objects. Don't forget the -- save option at the end, because we want these dependencies tracked in package.json as usual. So there are 4 packages. They don't have a lot of dependencies, as you can see. So it doesn't take very long. So now we can start our application up again. We're not going to notice any difference. It's going to look exactly the way it did before. We can navigate around here. Now my app isn't crashing, but I am getting a little error here saying title is not defined in my header. Yeah, so in our error page, so we can fix that. If we open up our app.js, here's where we're rendering error on this line, which is line 55 in my file, the third last line from the file. We can make sure whenever we're loading the error view that we also pass in just the title of our application, because our header is looking for that variable called title. So on this line, I'll just add in JSON object with the same heading that I have on my home page. It's the COMP2068 bookstore. This is the same heading that we see on our home page. So now that error in my console goes away. So I've just added this in app.js. It actually doesn't crash without it, but better that we make sure that error doesn't happen at all. It's good that we're in app.js because this is where we have to do most of our configuration for Passport anyway, right? We've installed the packages, but they're not active, they're not connected or being used in our application at all yet. So we've got to probably put about a dozen lines of code in here. We're going to need a bunch of require statements at the top, and then we need to initialize some of these packages like you saw the developer in the video do. We're basically repeating pretty much what we saw him do. So we installed Passport, Passport Local Mongoose, and Express Session. We need 3 of those 4 here. Passport Local Mongoose, we don't need in app.js. We need that in another part. We need that in our model, new model we're going to have to build. So these are all the dependencies that are automatically added by the Express generator. I'll just put in a little comment here. These are our Passport dependencies. And in here, you can use var as the generator does, or you can use let, which is newer, more modern. I'm going to use let. But we'll require Passport. And we'll require Express Session. We also want to require Passport Local, but we're going to do this in a little bit of a different way. Be similar, but not exactly the same. Because we don't need to reference the entire Passport Local library. We actually only need to reference a particular class inside of it, which is called the strategy class. So we're going to require Passport Local, but rather than the whole thing, we just want the strategy class. We're basically instantiating an instance of the Passport Local strategy. So those are our 3 dependencies. We haven't used Passport Local Mongoose here. We're going to use that in a model that we're going to build in a bit. That's the only new file we're going to have to build today, is we're going to need a new model to handle the user accounts. Because right now the only model that we have deals with books. So we'll reference these up here. And then once our Express app is instantiated here, doesn't really matter where we do this. I'll maybe configure all the Passport stuff here. Sure. So we've added lines 9, 10, and 11. So we've got to configure how the sessions should work, including providing a salt value, because Passport actually encrypts these session values. So we use salting for that. Then we need to initialize Passport as well. Okay, Joel, are you good? Okay. We're going to tell our Express application to use our session package. And there's 3 configuration values we want to set. So the first one is a secret key. It can be any string. It can include spaces. It can include numbers. It's used to randomly generate for every session unique values so that those sessions can be encrypted. So you can put anything you like here. If you want, we could even store this inside of our global configuration rather than hard coding it in app.js, that value. The resave true option, what this means is it refreshes the session if the user stays on the same page. Like if they reload the same page, their session will get refreshed. The last option we don't need, but it's a good idea for performance. Save uninitialized false means when a user first comes to the site, until they try and register or log in, don't bother initializing a new session. Don't create a new session because sessions take up server memory. Don't do that until they've actually authenticated, until we have to store who they are. No, it's not uninitialized. Not uninitialized. Yeah. I think it's correct now. Thank you. But now we want to tell our Express application to initialize Passport. So it has, the package has a method called initialize. And Passport session management. And both of these are methods, empty brackets at the end. Right? We're calling those 2 methods, initialize and session. So we're going to create a model in a minute. And our model will be pretty simple. We're going to need to create a new model. We could call it anything. We could call it user. We could call it account. I think we'll call it account. So we haven't set up that file, but that's going to be our next step. So we're going to make a reference to the account model file, which we'll build in a minute. So we'll require, oops. So we're referencing a file that doesn't exist yet, but it'll exist shortly. And then we'll tell Passport that that is the model we want to use. And it's got this create strategy method built into Passport. So we're telling Passport we're using this local strategy. So our users are managed through our account model. And our account model is going to talk to our MongoDB. Now, we also mentioned in the video that Passport actually will use our database to track the login status of any user. So we can read, or Passport will read and write the user status to MongoDB. But we need to enable that with two methods. We have a serialize and we have a deserialize. So read and write the user status information to MongoDB. So we can call these methods. We haven't written them. They're built into Passport. We can put up a comment here. So all of this right down to line 63. So this is all of our new stuff. Line 63 we already had, but here's everything we need to configure our application. So if we try to save right now, our application's probably dead. We probably can't load it. And if I go and look in my console, we'll probably see why. What error would you expect to get right now? Yeah, it's going to crash right here, right? Because we're trying to reference this account model that doesn't exist yet. So if we pull it up, it's restarted, and there we go. It can't find a model called account. So it's going to die right there. So if you're getting this and your application's offline and will just hang and eventually die, that's fine. That's really what should happen at this point. If it's still running, you've actually done something wrong. Or you've missed a step. Okay, I'll leave this up. Are there any questions? I realize some of this is new, and we're calling methods that we didn't write. You know, these just live off in Passport library. What does your error say?
It's telling me that the false I put after save initialize shouldn't be there.
Okay, couple possibilities. One, make sure you've got a comma after the previous line, and check the spelling of save uninitialized. Those would be the first couple things. Sounds like a syntax or a spelling issue. So what do you suppose our next step is going to be? Yeah, we need to create the account model. So inside of your models folder, create a new file called account.js, all lowercase and singular, no S on the end of it, because our models by convention are singular. So in here, we'll create our account.js. It'll be somewhat similar to our book model, but it'll be different in some ways. Won't be exactly the same, because it's not just a regular model like any other model. This model is going to be used by Passport for managing user accounts. So create a new JavaScript file here and call it account singular and all lowercase. So we can have a peek. It's been a while since we built our book model. We built it back like in over a month ago now. So here was the book model. Right? We made a reference to Mongoose. We created a new schema that defined basically our book class. And then we exported it with the public name of book with a capital B. So we're going to do similar things with our account model, but there'll also be a few things that are different. So our first reference is going to be the same. We're still using Mongoose because we want this to be a model for an account collection in MongoDB, right? We actually want to store people in there. So let's reference Mongoose. We also need the other NPM package we installed. Remember, we installed 4 packages, but we only referenced 3 of them in app.js. Which package did we install, but have we not used yet? Right, it's the Passport Local Mongoose. So we need that one here. So what Passport Local Mongoose does is basically it tells our application, this is not a model like all the other models. This is the model that Passport is using for authenticating users, for managing users and authenticating them. It's not like our book model or something else. Passport Local Mongoose is too long to type, so we'll just call it PLM, will be our variable. So I'll maybe make a note here. So just a note in here as to why we have Passport Local Mongoose here, yet we don't have it in our books model. So we'll create a new schema. But our schema is a little different. We actually can just create the schema like this. We don't actually have to define any properties in our account model. Now, in the video he did, I'll just go back to the screenshot for a second. Yes.
You'll see that here in the post that we actually register the new account and then check for an error. Right now, or including redirect on, is a logout to you. The register as part of the if it worked, which it should, you'll be called as the new account and find our middleware. We'll create a new section for we're going to define 2 fields, nickname and birth date.
So notice here, why do you suppose, I mean, what fields are we going to store? What fields are we getting from our registration form? We're getting a username and password. He didn't define a username and password here. Now we can define, you know, an email or username as string and a password as string. We actually don't have to. Why do you suppose we could choose to leave those blank? If you had to guess.
I guess in the video he said it's built in.
Right. It's those two fields are automatically built in to any model that uses Passport Local Mongoose for managing user accounts. So we can define a username and a password property, but they're actually implied. So you don't even have to define them. And I'm not a fan of typing any code we don't have to type. So in his video, he said, okay, well, if I want two other fields like a nickname and birth date, I'll define those in my model, but username and password, I can just leave them out because Passport will generate those two automatically, a username and a password field. So if we have additional things we want for the user, yeah, we want to define them in the account model. We don't need anything else other than a username and password. So our schema can actually be blank. So we can leave them out. Now we've made a reference to Passport Local Mongoose, but we haven't actually done anything with it yet. So what we need to do is we call this plugin method on our schema. So this is what makes our account model now connected to Passport Local Mongoose. So Passport knows this is for managing users. We reference it, but we're not really using it until here. We call that plugin method. So Passport Local Mongoose knows this is the model that we're using for managing accounts. And now we can just export it. We'll export it as capital A account. So now that error in our command prompt should go away. That error saying the module model/account cannot be found. So hopefully things should restart. Okay, they tried to read that error goes away, but looks like we still have a little bit of an issue. Sorry? We shouldn't have to. Obviously, there's something in app.js that isn't quite right because it's saying account.create strategy is not a function. So it's, let's see why. So it's failing here. So no longer fails here. Well, account is a reference to our model, right? We're exporting it globally with the public name account. Okay. Let me just stop and restart it. Okay, when I restart it, it seems to be okay. Let's just see whether my app is actually running now. Yeah, it seems to be. Okay, can you? What does the error message say? Okay, if it's saying cannot find module express session, that suggests one of two things. Either the install of that module didn't work properly, or in app.js, make sure it's spelled correctly. It may just be a typo in your require statement at the top of app.js. So have a look at that. So our configuration is now done. We've npm installed, we've configured things in app.js, and we've set up our model and connected our model to Passport local mongoose. So we had a fair bit of work understanding what we were doing and setting things up. But now things are set up and we can actually start to use Passport to create new users, sign them in, and control access. Does anybody need to see the app.js again? I can put it back up if you need to see it. Again, here was everything in app.js that we added. Starting on line 45 down to line 61, aside from the 3 references at the top of the file. So our next 2 steps are going to be to write post handlers, first for our register form, so we can actually create an account through Passport. And then our second step is going to be creating a post handler for our login page, where we use Passport to check if the login was successful. If it wasn't, we need to display a message to the user. If it was, we want to let them in and direct them to our books page. Once we can register and log in, then we'll make some changes in our header so that our header links will swap depending on if the user's logged in or authenticated, as well as our add, edit, delete links are going to show or hide, and we're going to control access to the add and edit views. So only a user who's authenticated will be allowed to load those views. So the file we're going to need for creating an account and logging in is under roots and index.js, right? That's where we have the get handlers that display the register form and the login form. So we're going to need to open up that controller so we can add post handlers. Are there any questions before I move forward?
Can you use the other credential name instead of username and password?
Yes, you could define your own credential name if you want to. Yes. So here's our 2 get handlers. So the first thing I'm going to do at the top is we need to now reference Passport, because we're going to use Passport in this controller for registering and authenticating users. Not only are we going to require Passport, we're going to need to make one other reference. What other file are we going to have to reference here so that we can sign users up and check their logins? No. What file did we just build? Yeah, the account model. So the post handlers are going to need to use the account model to create a new user or check a login. So we want to add both of those references. Because we're going to need Passport and our model to do these things. And then we can scroll to the bottom and we can write, first we'll do a post handler for register, because there's no point trying to log in until we have the ability to create an account. We'll write a post handler for register. And this part actually becomes fairly simple. So we'll use the account model. Create a new user account. Now, when we were creating a new book, if we look at our book controller for a minute, right, when we did a post, we called book.create. So create was a built-in method to Mongoose. We're using Passport instead, so we're not going to call the create method. We're going to call account.register. So that's built into Passport. So what we're creating is a new account. So here, if we were coming back to your question, could we define our own fields here? Yes. Right? If you wanted to use something else, you could. So we pass in the username. Yes, because the new account, so we're basically calling a constructor. So we're calling new. And the parameter is a JSON object with the username.
But how can the passport check that this username and passport to use another name? How can they check? How do they know? Maybe there need to be kind of.
Yeah, you have to configure Passport to tell it which fields, yeah, you want to use. So our first JSON object is this. It's a JSON object with username and the username from our input. Okay. The password we actually pass separately. So after this, we put in a comma. Why do you suppose the password, like why don't we have two objects in this JSON array? Why don't we have username, request.body username, and comma password, request.body password? Why do you suppose the password is passed separately? Give you a hint. The username and password values are not going to be treated the same way. Good guess. Yeah, what Passport will do is it'll hash the password. Sorry? Well, we're not quite done yet, and now we need a callback. So the register method takes three parameters. A constructor of the account model with the username. The password is a separate parameter. I find it kind of weird that we have to pass the password as a separate parameter, and that's not included in a JSON object. Sort of strange syntax. I don't really like it. It's not very consistent. And then our callback function where we're checking we either get an error or we get a new account. So now we can do our error handling as usual. So we can show the error view, and remember now we have to pass a title to our error page as well. if the account gets created properly, we have no errors, what should we do?
Shows.
Okay, we could redirect. What page should we take them to? Books or homepage? Or we might want to take them to have them log in is another option. So we've signed them up. Now let's make them re-enter that credential and log in. You can take them anywhere you want. Those are all, there's nothing wrong with any of those suggestions you've made. But I'm going to ask them to log in. So let's try this. We'll try filling out our register form, and then we can log into our MLab database and we can look and see. We don't have an accounts collection right now, but if this works, Mongoose should generate a new accounts collection, and then we can look and see what does a user account actually look like? What does Passport actually do in the back end if this works properly? So try this out and then log into your MLab account and see what happens. Sure. So I added these two references. It says it's in the models account or it's here? Interesting. So I'm going to try and fill this out. See what happens. Okay, well, that's a good sign. Didn't get the error page. I got my login screen. There's no error in my console. But now the real test is to go to MLab. And let's go look in my database and see if anything actually happened. So here's my database. I have an account collection with 2 documents because I was playing around with this earlier. So notice what it does. So it gives us an object ID like it does for books. Passport also generates, I can make this a little bigger, I'll take that. Generates a unique salt value. And notice it doesn't actually store a field called password. What does it store instead? Calls that field hash, one hashing algorithm that also includes the salt value, which will be unique for everybody. So if 2 users enter the same password, they don't get hashed the same way. Each has a unique salt value. So there's my username. Now, if we had defined other fields in our schema and saved those, they would be included here. We didn't save any other fields besides the username and password that are built in. So this is what one of those account records looks like now. So now that I've signed up, I should be able to log in. So here was, again, our code. So Passport kind of automates all this stuff. We don't have to write a salt algorithm. We don't have to write a hashing algorithm. We don't have to pre-build a collection in the database. Passport just takes care of all of it. Even if I sign up, if I create another account and use the same password, we'll see that the stored value will be different. So I'll go back here I'll put in a different email, but the same password, which is just rich in lowercase. I'll register again. Go back. So if we look at my third account, the salt values and the hash are totally different, even though I entered the exact same password. So this is more secure when we're not just hashing passwords, but also salting them, because that adds an element of randomness, which is a good idea. So Passport is designed to make our life easy. Knows what things we're going to want to do as a developer to secure this. It gives us all of those methods and all that infrastructure, and we can just link to it and call those methods. Same when we're going to log a user in. We don't have to take the password and hash it. We just send the username and password to Passport and say, Passport, go tell us if this login is valid, yes or no. And it'll give us a simple response back. It's 12:15. It's probably about time for us to take a break. Are there any questions before we do?
But if the password is different, how can we check? Because you told me if we save A, B, C, D, there's a different hash value, right? So when you log in, how can we check that it's right or not?
Passport checks for you. So we'll look at that when we write the code for the post handler for login. We'll see what it does. Okay. It is a good question. We'll see when we look at the method for checking. Okay, so I think what we'll do is we will take a 20-minute break here. When we come back, we'll write our post handler for login. And then once we can log in, we need to add a bunch of logic in the application to decide what to show and what to hide, depending if our user has been authenticated or if they're anonymous.
Can I see your app.js?
Sure.